All right, thank you for that beautiful introduction. And it's a special honor to be in conversation with Ron today. Big fan of your work and very excited to try to answer any questions in the crowd as well. Sorry, I'm just fiddling with the mouse up here. But before we have our conversation and Q&A, we have about 15 minutes each to share slides. I decided to give a couple of different samples and overviews of my different projects. This is a photo from a series called Stories, and it depicts different origin stories which empower us as Shinnecock people, stating where we come from and our irrevocable connection to our different unique landscapes. I always like to start with this map of Long Island from Brooklyn to Montauk. This is a map and illustration by David Bud Martin, another Shinnecock artist. And as you can see, if you're familiar with the South Fork, Shinnecock is between East Quogue and Sag Harbor, and today it's only about 800 square acres of land. I also wanted to include just a little bit of background from where I come from. If you've never been to our powwow, I invite you to join us. It's each Labor Day weekend, and this will be our 84th, I believe. This is a photo I took of our community center, just a beautiful space right in the heart of our nation, and of course a satellite image of Shinnecock itself. It might be a little bit hard to see from the distance, but we're on a peninsula surrounded by the Shinnecock Bay, and we're in what's known as the Hamptons today. So you can see the contrast between the greenery of the reservation and the over construction, I could describe it that way. This is our tribal seal and our flag. Shinnecock is part of over 570 other federally recognized tribes in the United States. And sometimes I make fun of our flag just because it's so complex and detailed, and if you compare it to the American flag, it's just hard to identify and speak about everything. But it is really amazing that so much of what makes us unique, from our right whales to our Algonquin culture to the indigenous box turtle, all makes us Shinnecock. I also want to acknowledge another photographer, Herbert Randall. He's my relative, and he lives just down the road from me. But he was my mentor early on. I think if it weren't for him and other family members, I wouldn't be in the photo realm. But he is most known for his work during the 1960s, going down to Mississippi during the Freedom Summer by co-founder Bob Moses. And so he taught me how to break out of my shell, how to go out and do important work in his footsteps. And so I started with our powwow. This is a photo of another Shinnecock tribal member, Shanae Bullock. Our powwow, just fascinating to me, started as a pageant, and now it became a full-fledged celebration each year. And so for me, being a photographer, this is the one time during the year that I feel the greatest sense of belonging, of course, besides being here today. But this is actually upon our Shinnecock stage. It's about 6 feet in elevation, so it's even more of a welcoming experience when you're allowed on top of this very limited space arena during this time. And so going back to the history and the origins, it dates back to a moment of first contact between the English and Shinnecock people, and reenacting that moment between current-day Southampton residents and Shinnecock tribal members. And so pretty much everything I do as a photographer comes out of the spirit of powwow. So this is a gathering of nations. It's also open to the public. It celebrates traditional food, dance, art, and really is just a great way to come and meet Native people, acknowledging that we're still a contemporary people. And so for a whole year, I actually traveled with my godfather, Keith Phillips. He's the third from the left in the blue. I was able to camp with him. We went to different powwows throughout New England, from New Jersey up to Maine. And I was just taking these candid photos every day, all day long. And this is what brings me to the cover image of my presentation. This is an image called Choknanipak, Man of Flint. This is the figure on the left. And he's battling with his brother Nanabozo over this eternal battle. And this is just one of hundreds of endless stories from Native origins that explain the origin of different things. And so these two brothers fought, the bad brother, as you could tell, lost this battle. But as they were fighting, and there was this huge chase that entailed the body parts of this bad brother, BIPOC, were spread all across the world. And that's why when you go hiking, you can go out and see stones, boulders, pebbles. And so it's really cool because it connects these timeless stories to what's happening today and reacquaints us with the sacredness of the landscape. And so this is just another from the series Stories. Interestingly, this is 2 selfies. So before I had a studio, before I had anything, you could just start with a selfie. Another project that separates from this series is called Behind the Dance. And I think when we think of Native people, we already think of them as maybe a vanished people, which is the theme of today's conversation, but also maybe this romanticized one with nature, or in the case of Pocahontas, I guess she speaks or is friends with a raccoon throughout that narrative. And so I wanted to break away from, even though these were authentic stories, wanted to document contemporary Indigenous people as they are today, especially in the New England area, just because so many people don't recognize that we're still here. And so these are just, if you're familiar with Humans of New York on Facebook, it's very similar style of portrait interview. And in my case, I wanted to include the individuals' names and their tribal affiliation. And so I just really love the book because these are all different friends and relatives. This brings me to my next project on this site. This is actually available online if you go to my website, but it surveys all of Long Island's site-specific Native histories. And so as an artist, you're always wondering, where do I find inspiration? What should I talk about next? What narrative's important? And so for me, this was just a huge to-do list of like different inspiring projects that could potentially branch out into. And so it wasn't until my mid-20s that I finally learned all this vital information about where we come from, because today, in the 21st century, we have the Unkachog Reservation in Mastic Beach. It's about 40 square acres, and Shinnecock Reservation, which is about 800 square acres again. And so it was really amazing to look at Long Island and see that our ancestors have footsteps in all these different regions, no matter where you look. And so this is the very first image and site that I included. This is Sugarloaf Hill. And back in 1990, unfortunately, this site was desecrated. It was destroyed. We have a clashing relationship with the Southampton town, and often our most valuable and sacred sites become developed for tax purposes or revenue. And it wasn't until 2021 that Roger Waters of Pink Floyd, of all people, came forward, donated $5 million, and now this site is in process of becoming in Shinnecock title. On the same map, we have the Shinnecock Monument, which you might have seen in The Daily Show on Comedy Central. But this is a 2019 project. It's part of our economic development, but also features proudly our Shinnecock seal on top. And this is right smack dab on Montauk Highway, so you can't really avoid it when you come to the Hamptons. And this is just such a great way to create awareness that we are still here, just because when we constructed it, people were first and foremost wondering, what is this? Why are they allowed to do this? And then they started saying, why couldn't they be more native, just leave the land as it is? But if you compare that to the Hamptons and the overabundance, it's a little bit ironic. And so as a artist going into history, these are some of the archives that I came across. And these are just different obituaries and different narratives of us becoming a supposed vanished race. And so whenever one of our ancestors or elders passed away, their obituary would inevitably state that this is the last full blood, this is the last king, this is the last queen, and the children of these people who they knew existed weren't native enough. And so there's many different layers to the lack of acknowledgement and the invisibility. And so this is the to-do list for the On This Site project. I live in Suffolk County, so there's a lot more bias in that realm. But there's still a lot to do, and I think that's the work of an artist. This leads up to my Rise series that is featured here at the Hudson River Museum. Rise is a project that includes self-portraiture, wearing indigenous regalia. So this is what you would have seen pre-contact. Buckskin leather, different wampum shell accessories, feathers, long hair, things like that. And so I've been working with volunteers to stage these images and use off-camera lighting to create these narrative or story-based images that basically ask the viewer who really belongs, what are unleft questions, what kind of reconciliation can still happen from our shared history. And so these are just a couple of different examples. This is another one that was done at a Birdcliff colony in upstate New York, titled Tea Time. And it's just this tense moment of eyes being locked, a woman who's in the cabin in the woods looking straight in the eyes of the indigenous figure. I wanted to include this snapshot of Noam Chomsky because this is partially what inspired this project. Just the idea that in America we have so many histories that we're not proud of and aren't taught in school, and yet these are still things that are so prevalent and relevant to us as indigenous people. And so when I was growing up, we were always told that, oh, you're still stuck on that, or oh, that was so long ago, or that was my ancestor who stole that land or did those horrendous things and not me. But these are really things that are tied in the land, and we can't really separate ourselves from what happened and the responsibility of making a better world. And so I just wanted to include other examples from the Rise series just to give it context, because as a photographer, I like to almost exhaust the idea, just keep producing multiple different images in the same series that deal with this theme of if you do acknowledge indigenous people or indigenous history, it can be scary because the house that you maybe lived in for generations could be on contested land, and the discomfort of maybe moving or giving up something that maybe isn't yours, if you acknowledge it, can be kind of scary. And so a lot of the motifs that I'm using simply use sometimes zombie apocalyptic films, other times it's just scary movies, but taking out this kind of crazed and bloody and scary figure or monster and putting in a native figure to evoke that same moment of fear. Other times they're relating to art history, and so these are just a couple of different examples of images from the Rise project. And so one of the other inspirations besides Noam Chomsky is the occupation of Alcatraz by a group called Natives of All Nations. And so this is a protest that happened in the 1960s and 70s in which indigenous peoples took over Alcatraz illegally at that time. Some of the spray paint that you can see on screen is still there. And it was really a moment of national acknowledgement that Native people had a voice, they had political needs, and so often in Shinnecock's case as well, there's so much vacant land that could be returned to Native people, but for some reason we always try to avoid the most obvious solution. Another example more recently is the Dapple water protector protests in South Dakota. And so these are all different things that, even though it looks like it could be old attire or older historic regalia, these are themes that are so relevant today. On the theme of invisibility, this might be, if I have time, I'll share this project as well. We do have so many vacant storefronts in the Hamptons because we're a sort of a summer destination. And so for some visitors, it's about 2 to 4 months that they come out, and then all the shops and everything say, thanks for coming, we'll see you next season. And for those of us who live there year round, it's just kind of a terrible experience. And so if we think about the earliest art history here in America, it's all about landscape painting, creating this illusion that the Americas are a tabula rasa, or it's a fresh start with no people. And so this is just a famous example by Thomas Cole, kind of showing the contrast between nature being wild and vacant, having no vacancy, and the colonists bringing civilization, bringing industry. Another more modern example of this. This is Rick Santorum commenting on Native history and just stating that we came here, we turned or let me quote it directly, we birthed a nation from nothing. And so that's still a very common narrative, the idea that everything that we know today, from the roads to the foods to the animals, the way that we shape our nation was only thanks to the European conquerors. And so just looking at Long Island, we had people, communities all over, and we still do. And so I like to look at the vacancies and wonder, like, what is the best use of these spaces? And so skipping ahead, I don't want to take up too much time. Just in the same vein of the Rise series, I started using these vacant spaces as a reflection or a mirror, just because sometimes, unfortunately, we don't think of Native people as much. There's statistics stating that many people don't even know a single Native person or have them in their network or them as friends or family. And so I wanted to look at these ubiquitous places and compare them to this link that these relate to Native people in a certain way. And so this is just what I'll end on. They actually made an advancement in the Hamptons. There was a law that stated that you have to put art in these vacant storefronts. But at the time of this article coming out, I didn't get invited to participate, but I'm hoping that Shinnecock will have a presence, just because if you have been to Southampton, there's no shops that are owned by Shinnecock people. There's no way to know that we are still there if you go to Southampton. And so there's definitely still work to be done on that front. But I want to thank you all for listening. I'm going to pass it to Ron, and he'll present, and then we'll have a Q&A. Thank you.
Okay, I just got shocked. Thank you for all coming. Just want to say a big thank you for the museum for inviting Jeremy and I out to talk, and I'm so excited to share the stage with Jeremy. Just to throw in a little twist of a dimension of my talk. So I grew up in Oklahoma. I grew up on Cherokee land in what is now Cherokee Reservation. I went to school in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, which is the Cherokee Nation headquarters, capital. And just recently, I became a member of the Cherokee Nation because my grandmother came across with the Cherokees on the Trail of Tears. So now I'm an official member. I have an official roll number on the Dawes roll. My grandfather had the Dawes had a Dawes roll number, so I'm really proud to be a member of the tribe, and learning more as we go along, and hope to become more involved in activities of the tribe. So it's been really interesting the last few months. I get a lot of literature now that goes on in the tribe. So it's been it's funny because I've known about this just as much as I've known about black cowboys. But when I came out to Philadelphia, I came out to Philadelphia to become a photographer with the Philadelphia Inquirer. And I left a newspaper in Missouri to come out here. And I had worked on my passion is documentary photography. I'd done lots and lots and lots of documentary projects. And I had just done this 1.5-year project on drugs in North Philadelphia. Spent in and out of drug houses and things. We did this big, gigantic project. And I had in the back of my mind to do something on black cowboys because I'd seen these guys that sort of, you'd be driving down Fairmount Park and, some guy would pop out of the woods with a big hat. And I was like, what is going on here? And so I found out where their stables were. Went up, made friends with the organizer of the stables. His name was Bumpsy Bullock, and just started hanging out there, taking pictures. And the story originally ran in the Philadelphia City Magazine, I think in 1993, or 96. 92. Was it 92? That's my wife. She's going to help me through this. So. No, it couldn't have been because Riley was born in 1993, right? All right, so 92. He's 30, right? So you see what's going on? Memory. So anyway, 92. So this story started, it came out in 92. I've been working on this project off and on since then. So just to give you an idea of how long I've been involved with this thing. But this was one of the first images from this story. This man's name's Bob Hill. He was he's no longer with us, but I followed him from the stables as he rode across North Philly to Fairmount Park. Wait a minute, how do I advance here? Does that advance? Yeah, there we go. Yeah, that's him again. There was a big mural in Strawberry Mansion, and he rode past this, and I thought, this is just too good to be true, So I call this picture Legends, just because the mural's not there anymore. But it was just an amazing timing for him to ride across this by this mural. This is I call this the basketball game. These boys were playing. They would work after school in the stables in North Philly, actually in Brewery Town, if you know Philadelphia. It's not quite North Philly. It's kind of south North Philly, if that makes any sense. But it was they would wash their one of their jobs was to wash the horses, and as this horse was drying, they struck up a little basketball game. So I captured that. Just so you know, these are completely random. These slides were pulled from over 10,000 slides. And I said I shot, and when I say slides, these are all transparencies. These are not digital. Some at the end are digital, but just about everything was digital. So this is my COVID project. when we went on lockdown at school and I started remote teaching, I went in and thought, well, I'm just going to pull through all these slides, catalog everything, and sort of take a look at stuff and cull out the good and bad. And so these slides were pulled from that. So I have about maybe 20 here. There's a lot more that we're editing for the book. I think we're down to about 200. And we hope to maybe pull maybe another 50 for that. So there'll be 150 in the book, somewhere around that order. But anyway, so they're not in any kind of order because I just kind of like threw things in a slideshow and put them up just so you can get an idea of what it is. But yeah, so this was in Philadelphia. This is in Okmulgee, Oklahoma, which has one of the largest black rodeos in the country, and it's really spectacular. I mean, 10,000 people, 3 nights a week, 3 days each. So that's 30,000 people come to this rodeo. It's unbelievable. But this was the parade that they would have through the town of Okmulgee. This little guy, I call him Little Roper. If you compare his belt buckle to his head, they're about the same size. But he was such a proud little guy. I mean, he was, doing the ropes and everything. This was at rodeo. I think this was in Texas. I tell you, I went to so many rodeos. I was in Texas and Chicago and Oakland and all over the place. And I think this was one in Dallas, I think. And also, I spent a lot of time in southeast Texas with a rodeo. It's sort of like this homemade rodeo group. So in Texas, you may have like a trampoline in your backyard. They have a rodeo arena in their backyard. And every weekend, they would have a rodeo in different places around. And so these guys would show up and they would just put money in the hat and they would ride for $10, Again, now this is a while back, and it still goes on because I was just down there in June in Houston and it's still going on. But it was called the Anahuac Saltgrass Rodeo Association. And so these guys would ride for that. So these are some guys preparing to ride. This was in Oakland at a rodeo. How many of you have been to rodeo? Yeah? Okay. So if you go to rodeo, and I grew up, so there was a rodeo arena literally around the corner from my house. This is what we did for fun. We would go to the rodeo on Saturday night and hang out, and they'd tie a $5 bill onto a calf and let all the kids loose to tackle the calf to get the $5. I'm thinking, there's something wrong with that, I don't think they'd do that now. But this is what we did for fun. But these bulls are big. They are massively big. And so I used to cover rodeos too when I worked at the Muskogee Daily Phoenix, where it was my first newspaper job. So these things would come at you. And I remember the very first time I covered a rodeo, the very first time I actually covered the rodeo, like to shoot it for the newspaper. I'll take this back. The very first time I covered the National Finals Rodeo, which is like the World Series of rodeos. So I show up, and I had my cowboy boots on, and I look over, and these are all guys who, they were professional rodeo photographers. They had cleats on. And I'm like, oh, I get it. No traction. And so I get down in the rodeo, and then, these bulls are coming at you, and I'm like cartoons. My feet are just spinning around. So from that point on, I remembered to wear football cleats to the rodeo. But so this was in Oakland. We did spend some time with this guy. He was a black clown. And, you see, if you go to the rodeo, you see the clowns, and they're, dressed funny, and they're doing crazy things. I mean, these guys are lifesavers. I mean, if it weren't for the clowns, there wouldn't be as many cowboys. I mean, they really take care of them. So this guy, I don't know if this coming up slide, no, there's a slide after this that's not included in this that shows what happened after this, where he literally yanked the guy, the slide before this, he yanked the guy off the bull because his hand got stuck in the rigging. He yanked the guy and threw the guy away, and then distracted the bull. So that's what he's doing here. He's distracting the bull to keep the bull away from the cowboy. There's kind of this cowboy code that if you get hurt, nowadays, so this was, like I said, this was back in the 90s. Nowadays, you wear helmets, you wear, shoulder pads. I mean, they look more like gladiators than they do cowboys. This was back when you didn't wear any protective gear at all. So if you got hurt, it was kind of cowboy code to not rush out and help the guy up. He had to get up on his own. If he didn't get up on his own, then people would wander out and help him. But you can see nobody's paying any attention to him. They're all just saying, he'll be all right. Just let him up, This was a group of riders, female riders that I found in Oakland. And they performed all sorts of really spectacular stunts and barrel racing and all kinds of things. And so I wanted to show what their life was like when they weren't riding. So this one was a stenographer for a court. And this is her during the during the rodeo. Yeah. Yeah, quite a contrast there. Just playing around with slow camera speeds and things, just to put a little art into it. I wanted to find, one of the things I wanted to do in this project, I wanted to find sort of the quintessential sort of Annie Oakley character type woman who actually just lived her life as a cow person, lived her life as a cow woman. So I found this woman, her name is Betsy Bramwell. She lived in, she's no longer with us, but she lived in Stillwater, Oklahoma. And I went out and somebody said, I was asking around at other rodeos, who is this character? And so they said, I got to find Betsy Bramwell. So I found her. She lives on a trailer, and this is what she did. She lived her life. She shoed horses. She trained horses. She rode horses for folks who couldn't ride whose horses was too rough to ride. She would break horses for people. So she was really something else. The slide's not in here. She also wanted to be a professional golfer. That was her fantasy. So every morning she would get up in the morning and she would whack like 5 golf balls out in the prairie, and then go to work. But so this is her doing her job. The woman had massive arms. I'm telling you, she was serious. So. So one of the things that was really the most impressive thing I've ever seen. So this guy brings this horse up, and there's a word, it's called rancor. The horse is really rank. So it means it's rough. Nobody can ride it. And so Betsy pulled the horse, and the slide's not in here, but when the guy pulled it up to her. Well, these aren't her stables. It was the stables where she worked. But when he pulled up, the horse was just banging off the walls. You just heard this. And she reaches in and grabs the horse by the reins and literally pulls the thing out, and it's like all over the place. And she ties it up to a post and punches it. And then the horse was still trying to, what just happened? And she walked over and she turned it loose, and then she put one foot in the stirrup, and that thing went nuts. It was just, and she rode the thing like that for about, I don't know, it seemed like 5 days. I'm running around with a 24-millimeter lens just trying not to get stomped on, you know. And this is probably the best frame that came out of that. By the end of the day, it was like it was a pony. You know, she's petting it on the house. She was amazing. And I have so many more slides of her.
Did she die in a job or did she die of old age?
Well, that's a difficult question. Betsy lived sort of a rough life, you know, as a lot of these folks do. And I think that life kind of caught up with her. You know, she wasn't that old. And in fact, I didn't know she had passed away until I started doing more research on her when we knew the book was going to happen and found out that she had passed away. And so I reached out. I haven't reached out yet, but I'm going to reach out to her family to see if it's okay to use her in the book. But the other thing I wanted to do, I wanted to find sort of the quintessential cowboy, you know. And another little thing is that word cowboy. Where does that word cowboy come from? So it came from back in the day when a quarter of all the working cowboys, this is back turn of the century, 1800s, you know, early 1900s, when being a cowboy was not this glamorous thing. You know, they didn't wear white hats, they didn't wear the fancy chaps and all that. It was really nasty work. Quarter of the working cowboys at that time were black. And so you can imagine where that word came from, cowboy. Get over here and tame that cowboy. You know, that kind of thing. That's where that word cowboy, and it stuck. So that's where we get that word from. But I wanted to find somebody who sort of lived that lifestyle of really just being a cowboy, not doing anything else. Because a lot of these guys, like Bob, they all had, that you saw at the beginning, were attorneys, you know, and they had horses and they had the hats, but they didn't really do hard labor as a cowboy. So I found David Cormier down in southeast Texas, just below Brownsville, and spent a week with him. This is when I was doing the story for Geographic. And he was just the sweetest guy. He's 21 here. And he lived his life as a cowboy. I mean, he worked stockyards, he shoot horses, all the nasty, dirty stuff that people working as cowboys did. He was admired by the town, you know. His uncle gave him a trailer on, I think, 5 acres of land, and I don't think the slides are in here, but on 5 acres of land where he rode his horse to work every day. That was his life. So while we were down there, he had a bad limp, and I went to the doctor, went to the hospital with him. They did whatever that is, an MRI or whatever that machine does, and they found out that he had cancer in his leg. And so I went back, and about a week later, his mother called me and said they had to amputate his leg. And I was like, oh, man, you know. And so I'd planned to go back down there, and then he passed away. So it was a really sad story. I mean, he had so much to offer as just a human. I mean, he was just the sweetest guy in the world. And now they have a rodeo in his honor down there. My mind just went blank. I'll have to come back with you her name, but I photographed her wedding. She did this Western style wedding, and I went down to Houston and spent some time with her and her husband. Now this is 30 years later, and they're still together down in Houston. Oh God, what happened? It just vanished. Anyway. But this is her feeding a little calf. This is at her wedding. One of her friends one of the guests, the pig with the pink, with the pink toenails. I just love this guy. This was in Dallas, he and his brother. I did a lot of things with fathers and sons because, it is such a family thing, the family of especially rodeo people it's really tight. So I spent a lot of time with families and things like that. This guy had to have been 90, and he was dancing inside a barn, 150 degrees in there. I swear it was so hot in Houston in the middle of the summer. And it was so hot that my camera broke. I mean, my camera didn't work anymore. It was so hot. But he was doing splits, and I was like, geez, I can't even do that even then, He was amazing. But they would have these crazy dances after the rodeo. This was at the Anahuac Saltgrass Rodeo Association party. And so they'd have the rodeo, and then they'd have a sort of like a pole barn kind of thing where they would have jukebox in there and pool tables, and they would have food and everything. But this was like 4 o'clock in the morning, and they were going strong. So I'm going to end on these two. So Jordan, this is Jordan Bullock when he was 10 years old. So I photographed his father owned the White House stables in Philadelphia. And so did a lot of work with him. Jordan was a world-class writer at 10, just amazing. And so I did a lot of things with he and his father. His father called me last year, right when COVID started. I hadn't spoken to him in like 20 years. He calls me up and he says, Ron, I really want you to contact Jordan. I'm like, Bumpsy, I haven't talked to you in 25 years. This is so great. And so he gave me Bumpsy's number. I called, he gave me Bumpsy gave me Jordan, his son's number. I called up Jordan. And it was about 2 weeks that had passed from the time that I talked to him to the time that I spoke with Jordan. And I said, Jordan, your dad just said we should get in contact. He said, Ron, my dad just died of COVID. And I was like, wow, So I've been in contact with Jordan. I've done a lot of stuff with him. He has a daughter now. This is him now. He has racing stables. He trains horses for the Parks Racing, Parks Casino. There's a racetrack in North Philadelphia. So I did things with him. He has a daughter that's really into the whole horse business. So I want to do a documentary on him. I've started doing some filming, and I need to get back to do it. But he's just a really sweetheart of a guy. So, but anyway, that's just a little oversight of my project, and we'll, I guess, do something now. So. Where are we going? Okay.
So we kind of thought at this point, after these two incredible presentations, thank you so much. My mind is just like bursting with questions, but I'm sure there are wonderful questions in the audience. If the two of you would like to speak a little bit more about what you saw in each other's presentations and address that, and then I'll just kind of stay up here and take questions from the audience and throw some at you. We have about 10, 15 minutes or so. So
I got a question for you. So I've been a big fan of your work. I think it's, and in fact, we're going to talk. You're going to come out in Swarthmore and show your work. We got to talk about that. But when you come up with these ideas, with these concepts, what's going through your mind to build these images? Because I know it's not like you go out and you take a photo. You actually have to construct all this. So what's going through your mind what's the thought process?
Well, actually, this was a similar question on what I wanted to ask you. Just because I was doing a little research, you said that you refer to charcoal artists, sometimes other workers in the darkroom. So I often look a lot to painters. I look a lot to people doing narrative illustration. And so all of my work is really planned out, it's sketched, it's designed, and then I go out and actually produce it. And usually it starts with a text or an excerpt, and then I try to create a work that tries to engage with that idea or concept in a photo. Well, I'm curious how you pull from like charcoal when it comes to something so like representational. Like you have the world, and how do you narrow it down to something like illustration?
Yeah. Well, I'm a lot older. I don't know if you know this, but I'm a lot older.
Yeah.
So that charcoal work was like back in the 80s, I think. So yeah, that was a whole different thing. That didn't have anything really to do with the cowboy work, but it was my first dipping my toe into the whole art process of how do you think about. And so like I come from a newspaper background. So newspaper and art are two separate things, and they shouldn't mix. A documentary photography, a good documentary photograph should not have an art element to it. Now, I know we say that, but when we go to ICA and places and we see all sorts of images that are in museums that are now considered art, but they weren't. The intention wasn't to make art. It's just over time it's sort of drifted into that realm. But so when I first started playing with that, I started looking at artists that I really got intrigued with, that sort of that smutty black of charcoal, and so I started to make work that sort of imitated that. And through a long, tedious process that I won't get into, it was all darkroom work, but my work started imitating sort of that charcoal. It had that charcoal element to it. So that answers the charcoal thing. So, but, and then it's been all sorts of other things along the way. I did cameraless photography. If you want to go to my website, there's a series that I did called World on a Grain of Sand, where I took little objects, small objects, and basically used the scanner to think about images from the Hubble Space Telescope. And I spent a whole winter, February, in my studio just playing with berries. It's a sad life, but playing with berries on the scanner and thinking about that. And it was really fascinating. And if you Google Grand Galaxy, so this is one of the things that I'm most proud of. So if you Google Grand Galaxy, there's an image in there that I made of egg white. It's just like a little sample of an egg white thing that was on glass from residue egg white. But it shows up in the Google collection of galaxies. And I'm thinking, wow, I've arrived. I'm right next to HRM 4750, that the Hubble took. So, but yeah, so that's I'm sorry, I'd ramble.
Thanks for answering that. Do you think we should do audience questions?
Yeah.
I think that would be great. Does anybody have any questions? Please go ahead.
Yeah, how does one become a cowboy today?
Wow. Well, it depends on how do you want to define cowboy? If you want to be a rodeo cowboy, you start off with a rodeo circuit. There's a million little small rodeo circuits that travel around. You can that you have to pay to enter. You can do that. If you want to be a working cowboy, it might be a little bit more difficult. I would imagine you'd have to have, and then again, I guess you have to figure out where is it that you want to work. If you want to work out in the big wide open spaces in Wyoming and places like that, I suppose you could go to an outfitter or a ranch and say, I want to work. Which I'm sure they would take you on for little pay. That's one way to get into it. It's not like this glamorous life. It's not easy, but I'm sure there's entrees into that. It's funny. I have a cousin who grew up on a ranch, and just outside of the town that I grew up in, and he went on to be really big up in the Army or Army Reserve. And I was talking to him one day. I said, Donnie, do you consider yourself a cowboy? And he said, no. I said, well, you had boots, he wore Wranglers. I wore Levi's. That's a whole other thing. But, he had the skull on his. I said, so you had the hat. I said, you got up every morning, you fed the cows. But he doesn't consider himself a cowboy. So, those definitions they wiggle all over the place. So, yeah.
sideline, but I recently read this incredible book called Horse.
Oh, I'm reading that. Yeah.
Oh, it's awesome.
It's amazing, yeah.
And this famous racehorse,
Mhm.
Lexington,
Mm-hmm.
the slave's name was Jarrett.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a whole story about how his relationship with his horse
Mm-hmm.
and how his different masters tell him he can't
Mm-hmm.
go into the stable, he can't, take care of that horse, and then another master says, oh yes, the horse is the only one who will allow him to take care of him, otherwise the horse will get sick and die.
Right. And the mother of the horse,
It's
yeah.
incredible relationship. So how many unknown slaves
Yeah.
had access to horses?
I mean, who knows, I mean, I can't answer that. I mean, thousands, I mean, because you think that before cars, that was the principal way to get around, and also, working on the farm and
That's
everything.
true.
So, and we're just riding horses. I mean, you had draft horses, you had all different levels of horses, so, yeah, I mean, I don't know if there is an answer to that. But I guarantee you, the one thing I probably can guarantee is the majority of the people that took care of horses, so say, make it back in the 1800s, were probably black and were probably slaves.
Right.
So, because it was just not a genteel job. It was not something that it was a lower class job,
Supposedly Lexington was the fastest horse
Mhm.
in
Ever.
the world.
Yeah, yeah.
I just have like a sort of a related
Mhm.
question to that. Over the past couple of weeks, whenever I mention the topic of this talk, the retort would be, "Oh, Buffalo Soldiers."
Right.
So I'm wondering, the Buffalo Soldier regiments that were formed
Mhm.
by the
Mhm.
by the
The
U.S.
government,
government
yeah.
in 1866,
Mhm.
right, following the Civil War with previous enslaved people. Like, did a lot of those individuals go on
To become cowboys? I would imagine. I don't know. I haven't researched that part of it, but I would imagine. But if you think about where the Buffalo Soldiers came from, so you think of the Tuskegee Airmen, right? You think of the Panther Division they were the first black tank division. So it's just like everything else. We always have to prove ourselves. It's like we can prove that we can go out and we can tame the West just as good as any white dude can. We can fly a plane just as good as it, So that's where it's just that constantly having to prove, black people having to prove themselves to society, to the government, that they can do things. And not only proving that they can do it, but exceeding it. So, yeah, so that's where that idea of the Buffalo Soldiers came from. And I'm sure a lot of them probably went on, and just like a lot of the Tuskegee Airmen went on to be engineers, and they went on to, to found aviating industry, or what am I trying to say? We did interviews when we did this, the Black Veteran book, where they went on to form aviation companies. Yeah, so, yeah.
I don't remember the name of that Jordan Peele movie from the summer. But,
Yeah.
Nope.
No,
Concrete Cowboy. Yeah, so, yeah.
It's interesting to me because your presentation's enlightening. I always thought of, in my mind, you think of like cowboy as sort of being
Exactly.
Southern, Western,
Yeah.
white culture. You're, at least to me, like inverting that, showing that it really has like a black origin.
Yeah, and
Black dominance.
yeah, and then the difference between, what is a cowboy. So I think in cowboy culture, like when we think of cowboy culture, we think John Wayne, and that.
Right.
But like cowboy culture in black life is all encompassing. I mean, it's urban.
Yeah.
It's, suburban. It's New York. New York there's a big cowboy. In Brooklyn. Yeah, I covered some parades up here for that. So yeah. So anyway, all that to say that it's the guys that were in that cowboy. Okay, so Jordan hates that movie, and I photographed. That was the Fletcher stables. A lot of the people from the Fletcher stables left the White House stables and formed Fletcher. And that's where, and the Fletcher's just around the corner, further up in North Philly. They hate that movie because it's just not. First of all, you're not going to keep a horse in your apartment, in your house. You know, I mean, it's a complete fabrication. And if you have a horse, you're going to take care of it because they're expensive. You know, they're not. It's not like a cat. You know, and you have to have money to pay for the food and all that. So yeah, it was not well received within the cowboy community in Philadelphia. Which is where it was based. Yeah.
Masha? Yeah.
Ron, what I appreciated about your presentation was you were helping us. You gave us names of the people in the images, so we started to connect with them. Jeremy, you have very staged images. I know that in one of the images that's here at the museum, you are depicted in the picture. Who are the other people in those pictures?
Well, those are very, I don't know how to describe it, very vulnerable non-native people, usually Caucasian people who step into roles that typically aren't who they would normally associate with, and it's definitely theatrical, so they're embodying maybe something that I fight against, or something that, in the case of the piece that's here downstairs in the gallery, it's a very affluent Hamptonite who is battling having like this indigenous person on their ancestral land. So it is a lot of people who, I think if they're artistically inclined or thinking that way, they're okay with it, and they're just like not assuming that the viewers will think of them as like some sort of bad person. But usually it's an artist, usually it's someone at another residency that I'm attending, stepping in, and we're doing some sort of exchange. But it is a lot of just like, when I sit at the computer editing these images, I'm just so amazed that people volunteer their time, they're helping tell this important story, and really they're going to be the subject of, I guess, debate.
Do you let them know what you're getting at before you stage the picture?
Well, I have another series in the same vein. It's called Nothing Happens Here, and I think when I was handing people the model release, and I think at that point they were starting to realize, oh wait, this is like self-incriminating.
Yeah.
This is like, maybe I'm the person who's not in a good position, but no one backed out and no one sued or anything like that. But yeah, I think that people were okay with it either way.
I had a question about the placard or the structure that you put up along the roadside. Have you found that that's created more dialogue, and have you seen more people at the powwows in the Hamptons as a result of it? I mean, I thought it was fantastic that they thought it was like maybe not the taste that they would prefer to have in the Hamptons.
Oh yeah.
Which is too bad, but hopefully it created a dialogue that maybe increased.
Oh, definitely. Well, it is called the Shinnecock Monument. Some people call it the totem because that's stereotypical. Anything vertical and native is a totem. But we have it as a marker for our acknowledgement. It's also economic development. And I think that everything that we do in economic development is controversial. And so as you asked, did it bring us more awareness and positivity? I would say yes, because normally about 70,000 people come to our powwow, which is amazing, over 4 days. But this past year, it was kind of like a quick makeshift version, if I would describe it. And we had 130,000 people come through. So we're hoping that this September, August, Labor Day weekend will be even bigger and more improved and better than ever. But really, it's just like our neighbors don't even know we're there, and now that we have this on the highway, you can't deny at least questioning, like, what is this? Where does it come from? I have to do my own research, and then you do have to live with it because it is on our Aboriginal land at the end.
Can I ask where you're displaying your art? I find myself thinking about dialogue and conversation, and it seems to me that it would be a wonderful way to have community dialogues, just people coming in and just talking about what they see, what they think. But I'm just wondering, are people really seeing your work right now? And can you tell that it's generated some change of thought?
Oh yeah, well I have two pieces here in the permanent collection from my On the Site project, and then the one from Rise. So I love the Hudson River Museum. Very supportive, yeah. But I would say there has been some hesitancy, some pushback, because luckily in my life and my experience, I get a lot of referrals and people that know someone who knows someone. They're a curator and always get advice for who to curate. But I've heard through the Vine or the networks that this is too political or this is too controversial. So sometimes, even though I live in the Hamptons, you have to go all the way to Yonkers or you have to go all the way to New Mexico to be accepted and have that dialogue. So it's slowly changing, I would say, from 2020.
Jeremy, I know you have the Moz House,
Yeah.
the BIPOC Community Arts Center, and I'm wondering, I know that's been getting a lot of attention, and how does that translate in terms of people seeing your work, and how is it being received by the community?
Well, thank you for asking. Moz House is a new nonprofit that I lead. It's on the Shinnecock territory, and it's a new and up-and-coming communal art space. So we have exhibits, we have weekly workshops, we have a residency for artists of color. So if anyone knows any artists of color in their networks, please refer them. We're all booked up for this year, but we only do one artist at a time, so it's relatively pushing with the momentum. But that has been a really positive thing because our tribal museum has been closed for about 7 years at this point. And if you think of that 130,000 people who came for the powwow, like what are they missing out on by not having that be open all year round? So it's just a taste or just a sample of people coming to Moz House, interacting with us, and just having a chance to actually see Shinnecock people as a living, breathing people today.
Do you associate with the Black Native Americans that are in upstate New York and the ones in the Hamptons? Do something with the ones in upstate New York? Because I've been up there. My father's cousin is a Black Native American, and I've been to the powwows there. So that's my first question. And the second one is that I recently saw a Black Native American talking to Farrakhan, and he was saying actually 1 in 5 Black people were misrepresented because they're actually Native Americans. So do you find those numbers are skewed? Or do you agree with that?
Well, that statistic I can't speak to, just because that's so hard and nuanced to speak about. Just tribal enrollment is something that isn't easy to explain or justify, or the ways that they quantify it, from blood quantum to lineages and proving all of that. But the interesting thing about Shinnecock and the Northeast is that we have a relative ancestor, Samson Occam. He was a reverend from the Mohican people, and supposedly during the 1800s he brought the supposedly full-blooded Shinnecock from Shinnecock in Southampton to the Brotherton in Wisconsin. And so even back then there was this stereotype that we had to save the pure-blooded. And so I definitely have Black ancestry, a lot of Shinnecock on the reservation, and in our enrollment do too. And so that's something that we're proud of, and I think that most people who do live on the territory, however, live as Indigenous identifying. So I think there is a lot of overlap, and of course, being in the Northeast is like everyone has shared relatives, blood, families. That's just how it is.
Can I just say one thing, quick thing about the Cherokee? So when the Cherokee Council decided that the freedmen could be actually enrolled into the nation, the numbers jumped from just a few hundred to 11,000. So, and that's since 2021. So that's when that happened. So it's we're all just one big people when it comes down to it. But we all have, especially if you get out to Oklahoma, just Cherokee blood is in everybody. And they also dropped that idea of like blood. You had to have Cherokee blood, so it was mainly just who's on the Dawes roll. So that's how the Cherokees work it. So.
What's the Dawes roll?
So the Dawes roll. So it was a system that was set up to catalog who was actually Cherokee. So if you were given a number, and you were placed on the Dawes roll, that meant that you were actually a member of the Cherokee tribe. And so my grandmother had it. Well, my grandmother actually came across on the Cherokee. She came across on the Trail of Tears with the Cherokee. Yeah, one of the things that pains me most is that my mother had a blanket that she carried with her on the Trail of Tears that she sat on in her whenever she would do her crochet and drawing her pictures and things in our living room. And when she died, my brother took care of everything and he just threw everything out, so that quilt got lost. But that was a museum piece, you know. So it's in our family on both sides, but who I've traced my lineage through is on my mother's side.
Maybe we'll take one or two more questions, and then we'll give everybody a rest.
I wanted to ask Jeremy, just in reference to the Shinnecock Nation. A good friend of ours who lives up in the Massachusetts, Connecticut area did some amazing genealogical work and found that some of his forebears were both Black Americans who had come to build railroad and Native Americans. And we met him a couple of years ago up in Connecticut, in the area where his Native American tribe had been. And I'm sorry I forgot the name of the tribe, but one thing that I wasn't aware of, he's part of an activist group that's trying to get that tribe re-tribalized because the U.S. government de-tribalized them so they didn't have to live up to their treaties and things like that. Did things like that happen on the to any of the Long Island nations, that there were policies that, you know, removed them from their tribal status or anything like that?
Yeah, that's actually very sensitive topic right now. During the last administration, if everyone followed in the news, the Wampanoag, I believe, lost their status just because of the presidential order. That's how sensitive and in the balance everything is. So luckily they were reinstated. It's a simple process to do that. But that's one issue that we're trying to deal with. On Long Island alone, we used to have 13 distinct communities of indigenous people. Now there's only 2 that have a reservation, only one being Shinnecock has that federal recognition distinction. But I think the thing that's really a shame is there are Montaukett people who live throughout Long Island. They're still fighting for state and federal recognition. But in 1910, I believe it was, they had about 40 tribal members in the courts in Suffolk County trying to gain that status. And the judge at that time declared their tribe extinct with all of them standing there in the room. Mm-hmm. So just this past year, Governor Hochul again vetoed the bill, ignoring their plea to become state recognized. And so we're trying to fight for simple acknowledgement. That's the big topic of today's presentation, just stating that we're still here, we're still legitimate, we have all this proof, but still we have to battle and go beyond and beyond.
Thank you for that question. Anybody else? Okay, sir.
A very simple question. So we've got a nice clear definition, or more broad definition of the word cowboy. Powwow. What is powwow? Since simply, we all, I think, have a general understanding of it, but.
Oh, sure. Powwow actually comes from an Algonquin word. Powwow is a shaman. I think that's the more common terminology. But it was basically a medicine person or healer. And powwow would come to people's, it was wigwams in our region at the time, thatch and bark structures. And if there was a sick person, they would consult, they would bring different medicines, there would be dancing involved. And so as early as 1650, our religious practices were banished. They were outlawed and punishable. And it wasn't until the 1960s, I believe, that they were reinstated. So by that time, we turned it from an individual in our community into a communal event. And so there's tons of dancing. Dancing leads to healing, and just the coming together is part of that healing as well. So it's interesting because it originates in the Algonquin culture where I'm from, and luckily still celebrated today. But speaking of cowboys, my mom and her generation, they all had individual horses, and that's something that I've always missed, and I never had ridden a horse before. and that's something I wanted to ask you, Ron, maybe the last question. When you were doing this work, did you ever horseback ride and take photos at the same time? Or?
Yeah, I horseback, yeah. So, yeah, I did. So we grew up, so like I said, we grew up in Oklahoma. I grew up in Oklahoma, and so one of the things that we did was we played cowboys and Indians on horseback, real horses, shooting with BB guns and bow and arrow around a real, honest-to-God fort. So the fort that I grew up, so Fort Gibson was the first military establishment west of the Mississippi, and they basically put it out there and put a bunch of young Irish kids out there saying, okay, guard the frontier. That didn't go over too well. Yeah, it was not pretty. But the fort is still there, so it's a historic site. But when I was growing up, nobody went there. So we'd get a bunch of our buddies together, and we all had horses. My family didn't have horses, but we didn't need it because the kid across the street had plenty. His dad traded horses, so we could just grab a horse, and we'd all go and we would play cowboys and Indians around the fort. So it was basically like capture the flag. And so if you got shot with a BB gun, you had to bail off your horse at full gallop. That was the thing, So I did a lot of that. One of the reasons I moved to Philadelphia is because I didn't have to feed anything when I grew. So that's why I'm here now, because I did enough of that growing up. So.
Well, thank you so much. We are so thank you so much. Powwow, because definitely want to go. And when is your book going to come out?
Hopefully, it'll go into production in the fall, and then it'll be out by. We're really pushing it out by next spring. So
excited. So
yeah.
Please keep us posted.
Well.
And everybody, thank you for your wonderful questions and for being such a great audience. And we hope that you will come back for some other programs that are coming up in conjunction with our wonderful exhibitions. And once again, thank you so much to both of you.